American colonists cared more about freedom than money. They believed they had rights and wanted a say in their government. Ideas from the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence showed they wanted to limit power and be treated fairly. Colonists even created their own government, like the Virginia House of Burgesses, to make their own decisions. This proves freedom mattered more to them than money.
But how? I have a question. But how will they get freedom if the British was like always on them, and they didn't let them get control? They wanted it, but they didn't let them. So how will they get freedom?
They were fighting for freedom. They broke the laws of the Britain. They were fighting for freedom. What about it?
Because the British was like taxing them. They didn't want them to get freedom, and they needed power. How was supposed to get that power? They needed money to get power.
I don't understand the question. Okay, can you explain again? Because I don't understand that question language.
Because the British was taxing them, so the British didn't want them to have rights. So now they needed power, but they couldn't get power without money. So money is more important than freedom, because they needed money to get stuff and more like to get freedom and power. They needed power to get freedom, but they cared more about money to get that freedom.
So you're basically asking why you're basically saying they cared more about money than freedom. That's what you're
Yes.
Well, my evidence to prove that they didn't was that the text states the colonists valued their freedom and expected to have a voice in their government, which shows freedom mattered always more to them than money.
Can you say that again?
The text states colonists valued their freedom and expected to have a voice in their government, which shows freedom always mattered more to them than money.
They wanted a voice, but since the British didn't want them to have, so they had to make an option to get power. Because say the teacher say, oh yeah, talk. Are you gonna talk? You're gonna talk. But if the teacher says, no, you can't talk. You can't talk. But if you say, oh, I'm gonna talk either way, what power do you have? It's basically it's basically like saying that see is talking back to a teacher, but she has no power involved to it.
Okay, but they always cared more about freedom because they broke British laws because they could have gotten money. If they cared that much about money, they could have not risked getting in trouble by breaking British laws, but instead they followed their rules and broke them, which means they valued freedom more because they could have just followed the Britain's laws to get more money. But they decided to follow what they wanted. That means they had rights and wanted freedom. Can you repeat that? You want me to repeat it all? Okay. If they really cared more about money, then why did they risk getting in trouble by breaking British laws? They could have just followed their rules and made money. Instead, they stood up for their rights and showed freedom was more important by breaking the laws. They could have made money either way, but they decided to do it their way, which means they wanted rights.
You guys give up?
No.
So you guys have to wait. Do you need them to repeat it?
Yeah.
Okay. If they really cared more about money, then why did they risk getting in trouble by breaking British laws? They could have just followed their rules and made money. Instead, they stood up for their rights. That showed freedom was more important to them because they would have made money either way, but they decided to do it their way, which means they wanted rights.
Could we get evidence for that?
Okay. You want evidence of them breaking the British laws? That's what you want?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Of them breaking British laws that they broke. Yeah.
But the British were taxing the colonies and they didn't want to pay taxes anymore.
Wait, you're saying that the colonists attacked the British to not pay taxes anymore? That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because you got your thing. I can't hear you. That's what you're saying?
The British were taxing the colonies and they didn't want to pay taxes anymore.
The British was taxing the colonies. They didn't want to pay taxes no more. Still, the British were the ones that had rules for them and laws. So, Do you have evidence to back that up, or are you just assuming that?
Let me find.
Okay.
My evidence is that they fought the British to lose the taxes because they wanted more money, so they cared about money.
They cared more about money?
Yes.
You're saying that they cared more about money because because I didn't understand what you said.
I said that, because the evidence is that they fought the British to get rid of the taxes because they wanted to keep the money.
That was British goals. The colonists always cared more about freedom. I can literally show you evidence. Okay. It literally says the idea of Magna Carta later inspired the American colonists to do their laws and government like that. Because they did their government like that. Because everybody had a voice, not just people.
What's like that?
Wait, what? You want me to repeat it all?
No, you said what's like that. But like,
Magna
what's
Carta.
like that? What's that?
The Magna Carta had everybody speaking. Everybody had rights and freedom to do whatever they wanted, and also had a voice in their government to say what they wanted and what they didn't. They were inspired by that to do their government style like that because they didn't want to be in control and wanted their own freedom and rights.
Say your evidence again.
That the American colonists. You want it straight from the text, or you want me to say it in my own words?
Just in words.
Okay, the Magna Carta. They were inspired, the American colonists, by the Magna Carta, because the Magna Carta was like everybody had their voice in their own governments, and no one had to had more power over anyone, and they had their own government. Wait, they had everybody had rights and freedom. And they got inspired because all the American colonists wanted their own rights and freedom. That's basically what I said.
But they needed money to get the freedom because I'm pretty sure they gave the British money for they wanted to get all the 13 states. They paid British to get their freedom. You know that, right?
They paid British to get their freedom. That's basically what you said.
Yes.
Well, if you're saying they cared more about money, I'm gonna state again that if they cared more about money, then why didn't they fight British laws? I'm gonna state again because I don't know if you heard. If you're saying this, if they really cared more about money, then why did they risk getting in trouble by breaking British laws? They decided to get in trouble for their own rights because they could have made money either way, breaking it or breaking their laws or not. So why?
I got a question. How can they get freedom without money? I just want that question.
Okay, wait.
You guys already asked us that question
Yeah.
twice in a row.
Like,
Y'all kept asking the same question. Shouldn't y'all have more questions to ask?
You guys give up? Or you still want to keep going?